Good afternoon. I am Bill Cavanaugh.
And I'm Morgan Addis.
We are with the Organizational Development Team here at AFPC, and today we will be talking to you about changes to the Priority Placement Program, PPP, which go into effect on 1 April. As we go through this information, you will see somewhat of a focus on military spouses, because that's what the initial phase primarily concentrates on. And so that you will get the most out of this experience, we have a couple of experts on hand to answer any questions you send us through the chat option. They will also take some time at the end of our session to continue to take some of your questions via the chat. So let's get started. Here's what we will cover today. We will briefly go over some of the background or history of the PPP program, and then delve into the current process a bit, as well as the anticipated changes. We will discuss how those changes will impact what you do with regard to the recruitment process, and we will also discuss the new application-based process, as well as the change to the responsibilities that go along with the new process. Finally, we will take a brief look at future initiatives being discussed for implementation during Phase 2 of this initiative. So let's take a very brief look at the history of PPP. Here's a fact to help you kind of frame the historical significance of the PPP program. Since its inception in 1965, 54 years ago, PPP has placed over 274,000 registrants. It's over 250,000 employees who have benefited from this program. Now, like I said, PPP was established in 1965, and it was established with three goals: to minimize adverse effects from things like RIFs and closures and realignments, to reduce costs associated with severance packages, and to maintain the workforce. Those have always been the three goals of the program. And finally, in terms of understanding a little about the background of the program, it's important to understand that the Civilian Transition Program, CTP, Staffing and CTP Division of DC PASS, has primary oversight of the DoD PPP program. Of course, as far as doing business here at AFPC goes, we refer any inquiries and actions to the AFPC PPP oversight team. So there's your background, your very brief history. Let's now take a deeper look at the current process and the anticipated changes. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan.
Thank you, Bill. Today we will look at how the program currently works and what changes you will see starting 1 April. In June 2016, the Acting Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness approved a new course of action for revision to the current policies of PPP. During the course of that decision, DC PASS has been working with the DoD components to revise the program to achieve the end result. The biggest takeaways for you as action officers are to understand the changes to the program: resetting PPP back to its original intent, continuing the ability to reduce separation costs, and providing eligible military spouses more control in their career. The training presented today outlines Phase 1 changes scheduled to take effect 1 April. PPP is currently operating via a single program system called the Automated Stopper and Referral System, or ASARS, and it will now become a two-tiered program. There will not be any changes to ASARS registrants who match in the system using the existing criteria. The second tier of the program is for eligible military spouses who are exercising priority status. They will not register in ASARS, but will apply for positions through the application-based process on their own initiative. So let's briefly take a look at ASARS, the current system used to register impacted employees, to better understand the current process and what the upcoming changes will look like. ASARS has been the primary tool that is used for all employees who are registering to exercise their priority status. Chapter 8 of the PPP Handbook outlines the procedures for registering in ASARS and clearing covered actions such as P1, P2, and if applicable, P3 and PS registrants. In looking at the new two-tiered program, the flow of ASARS remains the same. The releasing activity registers the participants upon arrival, and the gaining activity submits requisitions to filling positions with qualifying registrants. The primary change is who must register in the system. Looking into Subprogram A, there are currently two categories of employees, displaced and non-displaced. Briefly, displaced employees are those who are adversely affected by RIF or by declination of an outplacement job offer that's outside their commuting area. Non-displaced employees consist of multiple categories. They can be an employee who has completed a tour of duty OCONUS, who is not affected by RIF or transfer of function, who does not have return rights, or who may be facing possible separation or demotion upon return to their former position. They can be an employee who is a civilian dependent of another DoD civilian, either APF or NAF, and is relocating back to the U.S., or an employee who is a military dependent, relocating either OCONUS to CONUS or within CONUS. So let's look deeper at what the displaced category looks like. The subprogram A of PPP is for displaced employees who are exercising priority placement status by registering in AZARS if they are being displaced, meaning if they are facing separation by a RIF and have no offer of continued permanent employment. Or they can be an employee not serving under a mobility agreement and has declined a transfer of function, of work, or a covered management-directed reassignment outside their commuting area. So we've reviewed displaced employees. Let's look at non-displaced employees. For non-displaced employees, there are several categories. They can be employees who have reached their 5-year limit overseas and have no return rights back to a position in the U.S., or if their position has been abolished and their return would result in a RIF or demotion. In addition to Subprogram A, let's briefly look at the other subprograms falling under the non-displaced category and what their referral priorities look like. Programs C, D, and K are for our Military Reserve and National Guard technicians. Chapter 11 of the PPP Handbook covers their registration and referral. Program C covers Air Force Reserve military technicians. Program D covers Army Reserve military technicians, and Program K covers National Guard technicians. Program G is covered in Chapter 16 of the PPP Handbook and is the Disability Placement Program for the Reserve Component military technicians. Program F applies to dependents of Army, civilian, or military sponsors who are PCSing and is covered in more detail in Chapter 13. Program N is covered in Chapter 20 and applies to Air Force civilian spouses of an Air Force civilian sponsor who is relocating from OCONUS to CONUS. Program Z, known as the Defense Outplacement Referral System, or DOORS, and is a voluntary referral system. Chapter 12 of the Handbook outlines eligibility procedures for DoD APF employees, their spouses, and wounded warriors. Because registrants do not have mandatory placement status, they can only be considered if there are no outstanding P1, 2, or 3 matches. DOORS registrants can either claim Program A or Z. However, spouses, domestic partners, and wounded warriors may register only in Program Z. And finally, Program S for registering military spouses. Chapter 14 outlines the procedures for registration, referral, and placement. With the coming changes, Program S will no longer exist, but will just be called the MSP program. This is the biggest change being implemented to the program, and we'll get into the details of what that looks like a little later on. So now that we've covered all of the subprograms in the PPP Handbook and reviewed the AZARS flowchart, let's look at what the application-based process looks like for military spouses. The application-based process is the system in which an individual not eligible to register in AZARS can now exercise their priority placement status. Their applications must meet 2 requirements. They are qualified and that they are within the position's commuting area. With the upcoming changes to the process for an MSP, they will no longer be required or eligible to register in AZARS, and the registering activity will no longer be required to notify the MSP to apply to a job vacancy. The MSP candidate now exercises their preference on their own initiative. Before we go into detail about the application-based process, let's briefly review the referral priorities and the restrictions that apply. Here is a simple comparative table to better understand the changes to the different priority levels and their restrictions. For priorities 1 and 2, there has been no change. All promotions, demotions to positions with higher promotion potential, reassignments, appointments to include reinstatements and conversions, and transfers are prohibited when matching P1 and P2 registrants are available. This current referral priority restrictions remain the same. For priority 3, again, there is no change. The current restrictions for P3 remain the same going forward from 1 April. Program S will be the biggest change as of 1 April. Who the MSPs block has not changed. It is how they register and exercise their status that is changing. MSPs will continue to receive the same consideration that is currently in place. When a position is being filled through competitive merit promotion procedures and there are no well-qualified P1 or P2 referrals, a best qualified MSP blocks the selection of other competitive candidates, such as promotion, reinstatements and transfers to a higher grade, and VOS. Now I'll hand it over to Bill to walk us through how this affects the recruitment requirements.
Thanks, Morgan. So a couple things to note when it comes to job announcements and the military spouse. One, an announcement may be required to allow for the exercise of priority status. And two, when it comes to canceling an announcement, the AFPC PPP Oversight Office must approve cancellation requests submitted after the ad is closed, or if there are open or outstanding ASARS referral resumes. The AFPC PPP Oversight Office does not need to be contacted for approval if the cancellation request happens before the announcement's original scheduled to close date. For example, the announcement was opened on Monday and scheduled to close in 7 days, and the hiring official decides that they no longer need the position after only 2 days. In this situation, the announcement can be canceled without coordination with the AFPC PPP Oversight Office. To help you out a bit more with this, though, the PPP Oversight team will be publishing a knowledge article on MIPERS that will outline the process and package requirements with regards to canceling a job announcement. Referrals. A couple of things to note here as well. With regard to issuing a referral list to the hiring official, remember, requisitions remain active until the position is filled with a PPP registrant or a referral list is otherwise issued. And keep in mind that outstanding resumes must be cleared before the position is committed. And also remember, you must accomplish a new requisition if the referral list expires or additional candidates are referred. Something else to be aware of here with regards to referrals. When working the referral certificate and determining qualifications of a PPP candidate, you must note whether the applicant is well qualified or best qualified. Well qualified PPP applicants are priority candidates who register through ASARS or priority candidates who apply via the application-based process, such as ICTAP applicants. So at this point, you're probably wondering where that leaves the military spouse. Well, here it is. Priority military spouse preference, or MSP candidates, who apply via the application-based process must meet the best qualified rule to be considered. Also, and this is important, keep in mind that AFPC's definition of best qualified is that the MSP is as qualified as the lowest ranking candidate on the referral list. A question that came up during one of the live sessions we conducted last week was, what if an MSP's application did not include the full package of required documents? Do they still have to be awarded preference? And the answer there is no. The process has not changed in that the required documents that have to be submitted are still the same. Please ensure, though, that you have a strong audit trail and that you've documented everything if it comes down to this type of situation. So we covered job announcements and referrals. Let's look at a couple of important things to remember when it comes to interviews. Military spouses are subject to the same evaluation criteria used to assess other competitive candidates. Therefore, if personal interviews are being used as an integral part of the interview process, best qualified spouses may be interviewed. So, this means the manager or hiring official can interview the MSP along with all selectable candidates such as reassignment, change to lower grade, Schedule A, 30%ers, and VRA. An example of this is, let's say the hiring manager receives a referral list with 50 names to include 3 MSP candidates. He or she reviews the list and decides that he or she is interested in 5 of the applicants plus the 3 MSP candidates identified on the referral certificate. In this situation, all 8 will then be interviewed. A couple of other things to remember are hiring managers or officials can never interview a competitive candidate such as promotion, VOA, reinstatement to a higher grade, or transfer to a higher grade. And also, MSPs within reach cannot be passed over to select a non-spouse outside of the referral priority criteria. So the hiring official has selected an MSP. What comes next? Once a hiring official makes a selection for a vacant position, the HR specialist must work the job offer. Now, when it comes to what constitutes a valid job offer, the criteria for ASARS registrants and for those who use the application-based process differ slightly, and this slide shows you those differences. But basically, for ASARS registrants, the offer must align with the series, grade, and duty location for which the applicant has registered. They must also be determined well qualified. For application-based PPP status candidates, a job offer is considered valid when it is a permanent position that they have applied for. Basically here, nothing has changed in regards to what constitutes a valid job offer. Now that MSPs have the control over which positions they apply for, if they apply for a position and are selected, it is considered a valid job offer. The announcement will outline the conditions of employment, so they should be fully aware of the conditions at the time of application. The only exception is if the position is a temp or a term. They can still continue to exercise their preference. It's only upon the acceptance or declination of a permanent job offer that they will have exhausted their MSP preference. Recently, PPP Oversight updated the assessment templates to include screening questions such as, have you received a valid job offer within the commuting area? This will help. And also, updated job offer templates have been created and sent to the technicians to be loaded for staffing use in USA Hire. Now, once the valid offer goes out, applicant response time and reporting dates are, as we know, determined by location, CONUS versus OCONUS. This has not changed. The timing of this is the same for ASARS registrants as those who utilize the application-based process. There are some changes, though, when it comes to the job offers. The responsibility for working job offers for ASARS registrants remains the same. The gaining registering activity will continue to be responsible for coordinating and extending job offers for registrants in ASARS. However, when it comes to the working job offers for an MSP selection who has exercised their priority status through the application-based process, the staffing team here at AFPC will be responsible for the entire process. In addition, the HR specialist will be responsible for closing out ASARS by inputting the appropriate code for individuals who exercised their priority placement status and were selected. Another thing to note here too is that if a job offer is withdrawn for some reason, the request must be sent to AFPC PPP Program Oversight via their inbox. Now, just a reminder, if you have any questions along the way, make sure that you're typing those in via the chat option, and we're going to get to those in a little later. Okay, our next topic is the application-based process that we've been referring to today, and Morgan is going to cover it a little more in depth for you.
Thank you, Bill. Let's dive deeper into what the application-based process looks like. We've previously mentioned that MSPs are the group primarily affected by this change. Now let's look at what that means. With the new process effective 1 April, MSPs will no longer be required or able to register in ASARS for priority consideration. As a result, the registering activity is also no longer involved in notifying the MSP that there is a vacancy announcement they have to apply to. The spouse is given full autonomy in deciding which positions they want to apply to. They will continue to submit their application through USA Jobs, but they will now have the choice of deciding which job vacancies they want to apply to. Again, their eligibility for consideration is based on their qualifying experience and whether they are residing with their active duty spouse within the local commuting area. If the spouse hasn't yet already, they'll have to create a USA Jobs account, build and post their resume to their system profile if it doesn't exist yet already. Phase 1 of the PPP transition goes into effect 1 April. Any applications submitted prior to 1 April will still have to be worked the current way, but after that date and going forward, all MSP applications will be worked according to this new program. Eventually, the matches found prior to 1 April will be phased out. And again, job searches are conducted and applied for through usajobs.gov. When an MSP is applying to a job, they must select the appropriate eligibility category to exercise that preference. Keep in mind that an applicant can still apply with any and all other eligibilities they may have, in addition to their claim to MSP. The complete MSP package is made up of multiple documents and must include the completed self-certification of eligibility checklist with each and every application the applicant submits. A CPS transmittal was released detailing the process and provided a link to access the self-certifying checklist. The MSP package must include any and all supporting documentation needed to substantiate their eligibility or experience. Now that EO 13473 has been expanded to include non-relocating spouses, part of the application package must include proof of the military sponsor's current active duty status and that the MSP is residing with the military member within the commuting area. These requirements can be met by completing the MPF memo. Although the PCS orders are no longer required under this authority, they can be used to identify the member's active duty status and proof of residence. Other documentation can be submitted in lieu of the MPF memo or orders to validate this requirement, such as a utility bill or rental agreement if both the spouse and sponsor's names are on the document. However, if an applicant is applying under EO 12721, a copy of the sponsor's PCS orders are required. This requirement has not changed. Remember, this executive order is used when a sponsored spouse is returning from OCONUS to CONUS within the last 3 years. A marriage certificate is required with every application, and if the MSP is a working spouse, an SF50 showing 52 weeks of creditable service is required, along with a performance appraisal and a supervisory certification, which we'll address more in detail a little later. A military spouse will be reflected as a referral code S to the hiring manager for positions being filled competitively in the referral process. So let's review the unique details about the MSP priority status candidates. The following references provide guidance for MSP priority status candidates. We'll go into more detail in a moment, but before I do, let's take a look at how the overall process for the MSP has improved. So, what has improved for the MSP? As I mentioned earlier, they will no longer be required to register in Program S through AZARS because Program S no longer exists. The application-based process is much more streamlined, giving the spouse more control over their time, their process, and their career. It is eliminating the middleman by simplifying the application and placement process. To recap MSP eligibility criteria, the spouse must be married to an active duty military member and must be co-located at the assigned permanent duty station. Please note, this eligibility is not available if the relocation is due to retirement or separation of the military member. So let's review the differences between the two appointment eligibilities under the executive orders, especially in light of the recent changes made to EO 13473. With the expanded authority provided under FY19 NDAA Section 573, An MSP may be picked up under EO 13473 even when he or she is a non-relocating spouse. For example, an active duty military member stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base gets married. That new military spouse can now exercise their military spouse preference under EO 13473. They do not have to wait to receive military spouse preference until they relocate to another station. The eligibility criteria are that they are currently married to an active duty military member, they are residing within the commuting area, and they have neither accepted nor declined a permanent federal position, whether that is an APF, NAF, or APHIS position. There have been no changes to Executive Order 12721. This category can cover spouses whose sponsor is assigned to a service school or for individuals PCSing OCONUS to CONUS. This appointment eligibility is also for those spouses whose sponsor has a follow-on assignment. They can exercise priority status once relocated to the follow-on duty station. So what does the certification process look like? Here is just a brief look at the process and supporting documents that are required to verify an MSP's priority status. You can also refer to the PPP Quick Reference Sheet. This will provide a brief overview of required supporting documents based on the preference eligibility. However, it does not supersede the PPP Handbook and DoD guidance. Remember, all applicants that are rated against the competitive criteria are blocked by best qualified military spouses. AFPC's definition of best qualified is the spouse has to be as qualified as the lowest ranking candidate on the certificate. Military spouse preference does not apply if it will result in a change to lower grade, separation of a current permanent, term, or temporary employee. In addition, it does not apply if it will violate statutes or governing regulations for vet preference or nepotism. Key points: if a military spouse is within 6 months of departing their current location, they may be non-selected for a permanent position. And just as a refresher, there are still criteria in place that terminate an MSP's priority status. Spouses retain preference for continuing and non-continuing positions until they accept or decline a permanent continuing position, if they lose their spousal status, or if they fail to meet immediate appointability. But the key takeaway to remember is once they are appointed using their military spouse preference, it has been exhausted, and they will no longer receive that preference or block positions until they PCS to their next location. When it comes to responsibilities in servicing the MSP and any other priority status candidates, it will continue to be a joint partnership between the gaining CPS and the staffer here at AFPC in upholding the integrity of the program, to include program violations, responding to inquiries regarding MSP candidates, and most importantly, ensuring and maintaining a clear audit trail for personnel actions involving MSP candidates. Bill, can you walk us through what the responsibilities of managing the MSP program look like?
Sure, Morgan. We'll take a little deeper look at that. Responsibilities at the servicing CPS. The servicing CPS releasing activity will continue to counsel PPP priority status candidates on the application-based process and how an MSP can exercise his or her priority status. They will provide direction to the MSP on things like where to go to access forms, as well as the self-certification checklist or the template for the MPF memo, which is required when applying. The one exception, though, concerns ART, or Air Reserve Technician positions. Air Force Reserve Command is the POC for counseling and providing guidance to military reserve technicians who occupy officer-level positions. Okay, responsibilities of the PPP Clearinghouse, or PEACH. The PEACH is responsible for the initial requisition process for the RPA. They submit the requisition in ASARS with the appropriate referral code. They include eligibility categories with regard to who may apply on the RPA checklist. And if there is an identified ICTAP candidate, they determine whether or not the candidate is qualified. Now let's look at AFPC's responsibilities. AFPC responsibilities include opening job announcements when positions are subject to PPP clearance, recruitment is open to external candidates, recruitment involves competitive procedures, and recruitment includes appropriate eligibility categories. This allows PPP candidates to exercise their priority status. AFPC responsibilities also include verifying priority placement status eligibility prior to extending a job offer. They include taking care of PPP clearance requirements as applicable based on the situation, such as clearing PPP candidates who applied to former announcements. And they also include obtaining supervisory certification from servicing CPSs as applicable, because if a priority status candidate was employed in the federal government prior to relocating with the military spouse, then he or she must provide certification of their performance from their supervisor to the servicing CPS. Finally, AFPC's responsibilities include considering and working PPP candidates via the application-based process, determining whether or not PPP candidates meet the well-qualified requirement, with the exception of MSPs, of course, who must meet the best qualified. And AFPC is responsible for putting the self-certification statement in job offers. As we mentioned earlier, the PPP Oversight Office handles all ASARs and application-based inquiries, and they provide guidance to the CPSs and to AFPC staffing teams. Their inbox address is here on the slide. One more plug on the opportunity for you folks to submit your questions through the chat. Okay, folks, our final topic today is future PPP got it, initiatives, and Morgan will take you through that, and she'll also wrap us up.
Thank you, Bill. It's important to stress that none of these projected changes are final, but we wanted to share what Phase 2 implementation may look like. ASAR's Message 1901, dated 28 February 2019, was released and gave some ideas of what changes may be in the pipeline for those eligible employees. The changes outlined here again are just a prospective overview of what changes may be coming for Phase 2 transition. The final way forward will be communicated once it's been released for Air Force implementation. Key references for today's training: the entire PPP handbook can be found within the ASAR's website or is accessible through the DC Pass website. In addition, the recently released communication on the changes to PPP, along with the MSP self-certification checklist and fact sheet, can be found on MyPERS. So thank you for your time and attention. We welcome any questions you may have and ask that you please provide them in the chat feature. At this time, we'll turn it over to our experts to respond to any questions that you may have. Thank you.